Hi everyone, thank you for joining. I'm Carrie Jacquet, VP of Marketing with Sensage, and I'm here with Joe Gottlieb, the President and CEO of Sensage. And this is another 5 minutes with Joe time. So first, let's get the hard question out of the way. Diane Sawyer or me? Who's got it going on?
You're here. I'm going with you.
Okay. See why they pay him the big bucks? All right, good call. So, and I'm more affordable.
Clearly.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the new legislation we're seeing, some of the interesting ways that the governments around the world are trying to deal with data breach notifications, data and privacy laws. Can we talk a little bit about what we're seeing in Europe first? And then maybe move into, because I think they were sort of early on with a lot of the regs that we're seeing, right, and that we're dealing with our customers.
That's right. So we've seen in the European Union now for over 5 years, there's been legislation in place that has required the telephone companies to maintain their call detail records so that they can turn them over to law enforcement when presented with a subpoena. So it's become very routine actually, and this was driven by the terrorist bombs that were set off in both Spain and the UK using cell phones. And so once that happened, that really drove, it was a lightning rod issue, the legislation passed pretty quickly and led to the requirement for telcos to keep 6 months to 2 years of their CDR data. Well, that's been a big solution area for us because these guys have billions of records that they have to maintain and then in a timely fashion serve up with very needle in the haystack queries. Who did this one person with this one number call during a certain time frame, and that's buried in billions and billions of records across all the subscribers.
Right.
So that was an interesting piece of legislation that's been around now for a while. The EU, as reported I think this week, is now also investigating rules for data breach notifications.
Mm-hmm.
Right, thank you for that help.
Yes.
And notably, we just saw in the U.S. a few weeks ago the first serious consideration of a national data breach notification law here in the U.S. with bills targeting both the Senate and the House. Now, we haven't yet seen the bill signed into law. I'm pretty certain that's still true. In fact, we've got a little bit of a thing in the way right now with our own deficit ceiling and budget negotiations going on. But hopefully we'll get back on that because it was also a lightning rod issue here in the U.S. To take the 46 or so different state laws for data breach notification and bring them down to one national driver, one national specification for how to handle data breaches. Huge step forward for law enforcement it would be, and now the EU looks like they're considering the same. Hopefully these bills can maintain their momentum and velocity because they really will satisfy a key requirement to streamline the data breach notifications. Because today, if you're in the midst of a data breach, you have to, even just for the U.S., let's say you're a global company,
respond to all these different...
You've got to deal with all the different regulations that pertain in various jurisdictions, and the fact of the matter is, it's just totally error-prone, and it's a complete nightmare. And while you should be devoting your energy to sort of thinking about customers, safeguarding your customers, containing the attack or the breach, and understanding how you're going to prevent it from happening in the future, you're unwinding all of this red tape because of the different laws and the fact that they aren't the same. There's not one standard. So we could see some developments there. We also saw some legislation that looked like it might be getting some momentum after about 10 years of attempts in the requirement for U.S. telephone companies to retain IP address and subscriber information so that they could pursue suspected child exploitation criminals and or child pornographers. So another one, presumably a lightning rod issue that could drive legislation pretty rapidly, but it still appears to be mired behind some of the backlog there. And I think the overall theme and trend here is that there's movement starting to happen. I think there's more recognition being given to some of these key these bills and some of these key considerations where law enforcement has to evolve, but still subject to some of the gridlock and bureaucracy that we tend to see in large government affairs. So hopefully we'll see some breakthroughs here soon. In the meantime, we'll have to keep coping with some of these lack of standards in some of these areas, which obviously underscores an even greater requirement to stay on top of your data, to be proactive about monitoring these things so that at least in that part of the puzzle you have a strong solution and a strong footing when and hopefully not, but if you are ever breached, and have to act on a fall through in a damage control scenario there.
And I heard something interesting from one of the guys in Europe at a customer site. They were actually able to take the request for an investigation from months to a few days, because they were able to not only log the data in such a way that, you know, it still maintained the fidelity or the integrity of the data as it was when it was originated, but they were also able to query it in flexible ways. Do you want to spend like 30 seconds on that? And this will now be called 7 Minutes with Joe.
This one's an extended edition, so extra bonus. So, look, this comes down to very, very difficult math, and I think in the cases where these telcos were trying to fish this data out of these huge data stores, with traditional technologies, the best mainframe databases, the best, you know, Unix server databases, it's still very, very difficult, and it's because a relational database has very high overhead and indices are required to be able to get back at that data, and sparse queries are just a real pain to get at. And so traditionally this has often been either prohibitive, you just can't get the query processed, it falls over or times out or you give up before you ever get a result set, or it can literally take months to run, or weeks. And so what we've seen with a very purpose-built technology, columnar-based, high compression, and with some great filters, there are Bloom filters and other filters that we use to minimize the full data scans that we require to find the data. These things actually translate to very, very workable response times, often minutes, and in some cases even seconds, which that takes your load down from either prohibitive, not available, or months or weeks, and getting it down to minutes and or even seconds. But then some of the hardest ones, even for our technology, you could get into, you know, multiple minutes, even multiple hours.
And it's iterative, so you're getting some answers back and then digging further.
That's right,
Yeah.
but the point of comparison here would be just unavailable.
Yeah.
And the
Yep,
fact,
yep,
you know,
agreed.
so now it's, okay, can I solve this problem with math or not? If I can, I'd like to have it really fast, but having it sort of fast is better than not having it at all. And I
Right.
think we're seeing a lot of progress there. And by the way, there's secret sauce involved, but the fact is there's trade-offs. There's design trade-offs in the technology that allow us to do that very, very well. One thing we can't do, we can't update a log record. Why would you ever want to update a log record? You should never change any logs.
Right.
So we've stripped that technology, that capability out of our columnar database, and it makes us faster for doing all the writes and the reads. So just one little example where the trade-off has served us for this type of application.
Right, that totally makes sense. So speaking of minutes, we are now out of minutes. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back again with 5 or more minutes with Joe.